And this basic understanding will help us to handle the more advanced and difficult problem of morality, if we know how to apply the principle properly. And you will remember the great difficulty with morality, that at every point Locke's argument says there should be a sharp distinction between the responsibilities of the government and the responsibilities of the church, but morality seems to belong to neither one of those, to both together, and that threatens the principle. Because although it is possible to say that government should simply make laws to keep the peace and never worry about morality, that doesn't seem right. Do we really want the terrible punishments that governments have in their power to be applied to people who are not bad people, bad in the moral sense? That would seem to be wicked and inhuman. And at the same time, don't we want the law to encourage people not just to do what the community feels is convenient, but don't we want it to encourage people to be good people? Wouldn't government be better if it did that rather than making a mess of it or neglecting it? And at the same time, religion has the same possibilities. You could say that the only responsibility of religion is to teach the truth about God as the religion understands it, but that has nothing to do with being a moral person. Religion is supposed to instruct you and show you the right way to heaven, but not to teach you morality. But would we really want to separate those? End up saying that there are bad people in heaven and good people in hell because religion taught the way without having an opinion about what's moral and what's not. So this is a difficulty, and Locke does not try to solve it by explaining to us which of these two authorities gets morality. It's simply shared by both. It's a fundamental human concern that spans our concern with this world and our concern with the next world. And so what Locke solves the problem by dividing morality into kinds. There is the kind that has to do with what matters to God and what matters for the next life, and that is the religious sort. And at the same time, there's what matters to nature, because, as Locke says, nature hasn't properly provided for us in this life. Therefore, we have to work hard, and therefore we are tempted to steal the labor of others. And that's the essence of government morality, taking away the results of work, the work of other people that by nature belongs to them, because it's work that they've done. Whereas the essence of religious morality has to do with the things that are pleasing to God and the things that obedience to God requires. And then the sharpness of that distinction should determine whether you can agree with Locke's argument. That's his hardest problem. And if you can say he succeeds in that, then it seems that you agree he's succeeded overall. And with that, we should turn to the chapters for today. And then to the particular chapters of today's reading. As I say, chapter 10 announces its topic clearly in the title, and I think it's within your reading capacity to work out these 4 reasons that set the limit of toleration, and it would be good for you to study that and follow the argument on your own. A few things would be helpful. In the second section, he's making a reference to certain opinions of orthodoxy, or that some churches suppose are orthodox, that he feels are not according to the proper principles of toleration. They're religious beliefs that in themselves violate those principles and therefore should not be tolerated. Some people cite Scripture in order to say that faith is not to be kept with heretics. So to keep faith with someone. That's an expression meaning to be honest and to stand by your word. And it can be made to sound like a proper religious principle, that you should do that to people who are good and decent people, with the implication that they share your religion, and the people who are outside your religion, who are not decent in that way, should not be dealt with honestly. You shouldn't keep faith with them. And Locke finds that need not be tolerated, because it's an opinion that sounds religious and expressed in religious language, and can even be expressed through Scripture, that hides a violation of proper civil behavior. And he says something similar about the rules within certain religions about ratifying or making sacred the temporal power of the king. That it was a common opinion in the England of Locke's day, and especially before, that kings are chosen by God and therefore have divine rights. But that implies that the churches can judge their rights and perhaps withhold it on certain circumstances. And Locke again thinks that this is religious sounding language that only hides a violation of the principles of good civil government, that what churches really want in that case is to choose the governors, who would then be the governors of everyone. And Locke feels that that should be tolerated because it violates the principles of toleration itself. And that true believers, the members of the true church, have dominion over things, has the same problem. That's a way to express a claim that things belong to the people that God favors, and to whomever God gives the privilege to have those things. But this then hides, according to Locke, the opinion that since we are the people with the true understanding of God, therefore God has given everything to us, and therefore we do not have to respect the laws of property. And Locke feels, again, that that's religious sounding language that violates what truly belongs to the government. And when churches speak in a religious way and pretend to act and think religiously in opinions that violate the civil law and the foundations of good government, then that is not something that Locke thinks we should tolerate. The third, we can see here on page 21, a church can have any right to be tolerated by the magistrate if it is constituted on a basis such that anyone who joins it is thereby giving himself over to the protection and service of a different monarch. Now, Locke is probably thinking about the Catholic Church here, and the editor of this text thinks so too. But he poses this rule in a general way. If religion includes the principle that you must be obedient to some worldly authority, and if that worldly authority is not the one over the country that you happen to be living in, then Locke says that should not be tolerated. That again seems to come under the category of we do not tolerate things that themselves violate the principles of toleration, as opposed to saying we have toleration for many things, but we don't tolerate absolutely everything. That would be a different way to put down markers. But here, Locke again seems to be saying that what we don't tolerate is a thing that itself violates principles of toleration. Now, that may not be true for the fourth reason. The fourth reason may be Locke's limit on toleration, saying I tolerate a lot, but not absolutely everything. But 4, I think you can perfectly well understand on your own, and it will be good for you to work out the argument for yourself and bring that to our class session. Now here in chapter 11, I'm on page 22. The title is Gatherings, and as I said before, the title is not very revealing. It's also talks of assemblies, and the general topic is what it means for people to come together in groups, particularly for religious purposes. And his special attention is what it seems to mean to outsiders, what people generally think when some group of strangers gets together in private and takes themselves off from the general mixing with the public and worships God in their own and unfamiliar way. And what's bound to happen? Well, this raises suspicion. This is an origin of intolerance. And, the things that we don't understand, that we feel excluded from, are apt to make us angry or afraid, and maybe angry because we're afraid. And so he considers whether there's any justice in this suspicion. And you can see in this chapter that he's making very liberal use of this imaginary person who comes up to argue with him. So it's very much an argument against common opinion in this chapter. But what should matter to us is that he makes use of a certain pattern of argument that is still with us, still very powerful, still very important when we talk about tolerance and differences among us. And the basic idea is that the separate groups are threatening not because of anything in their doctrine, but because of the intolerance with which they're treated. He might say simply that these separate groups are generally innocent and there's nothing to worry about, but that's not how he constructs the argument. You can see here at the start of the chapter, he says that these separate groups commonly are thought to be hotbeds of sedition and dissent. And so a hotbed is something where something happens a lot, particularly something bad or troublesome can be found. And dissent is disagreeing, and particularly disagreeing with the authority of the government. And then sedition is a step worse. Sedition is rebellion, actively maybe plotting to overthrow the government, or at least working out ways to disobey the law. And so he says, perhaps some of them have been, which is to say, perhaps it's been true when we are suspicious of these groups that they deserve our suspicion and they've actually done these things. But then the twist by which he saves his argument for toleration is that it's not because of the special beliefs of these scrolls, but it's rather troubles relating to oppression and lack of freedom. He turns the agency around. That are not seditious, they're not dissenting, they're not trouble for the common good, because they have secret teachings that are not public, but it's because they are not tolerated, because they're private but no harm to anyone. It's because they're not tolerated that eventually they come around to being hostile. As he will say later in the chapter, they oppose force with force. And this is a strong argument in favor of toleration, that the things that we don't want to tolerate, that perhaps we can't afford to tolerate, are created by our intolerance. rather than being in the people that we're worried about to begin with.